Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Too Sweet MTG, and welcome to our Unfinity set review for Cube. Like before, I am joined by James. How's it going, man? You good?
Hey, yeah, man, I'm good. I'm good. Excited to talk about some spicy cards in this set.
Some spicy and some silliness, I think, is what we're in store for today.
Oh yeah,
Cool. So I think best place to start is just give a quick overview of like what is Unfinity. What are the cards that we're going to be talking about? So generally speaking, these sets are kind of designed for more experienced players because they're designed with kind of fun in mind, and they generally do sillier things and kind of more wackier things than you would normally get in a regular game of Magic. So the set's full of cards that, generally speaking, they can't really print into a normal Magic set. So this isn't always because of power level, although there are some kind of game-breaking cards that we'll get into in a little bit in the video. One thing to keep in mind with this set is that quite a few of the cards just don't work in the regular rules of Magic, but they do work how you think they work. So if you have a cube, there's a high likelihood that the people playing it have played a lot of Magic, so they're kind of used to these kind of things. But some of the cards that they can print in these sets are things that you don't normally see. So you have things like Art Matters cards, for example. You have like Dexterity cards, so you can be flipping cards or balancing them on your head, or even like playing under the table, that kind of thing. These sets are also normally really fun to play. Like the last one was Unstable, I think, a few years ago, and that was a really cool, really fun draft environment. So before we get into the cards themselves, the other thing to talk about is the cards that we're going to be looking at. We're generally going to be looking at the ones that we think could make it into a regular cube, into like the widest range of cubes possible. We're going to be talking about both regular cards and also Acorn cards today. The way you can tell the difference is that Acorn cards at the bottom, the hollow foil is a little acorn. These are the cards that previously would have been silver bordered, and basically the silver bordered cards and the Acorn cards just aren't legal in any format whatsoever. Fortunately, Cube is kind of your own format, so if you want to play them, you can. But it's just something to keep an eye out for because those are cards that are going to be more weird in terms of the rules than the regular holofoils. The other cards that we just going to get out of the way now and say we're not going to be looking at is cards that care about stickers or attractions. Now, I think these cards are really cool, but from building a queue point of view and a management point of view, they are a bit of a pain, if I'm honest. So they're all some kind of differ depending on if it's limited or if it's draft. So for limited, for attractions, they are in the draft. They take up slots in your cube. And you don't only need the attractions themselves, but you also need the cards that actually let you open the attractions, and that can take up a lot of real estate. For the stickers, the way it works in limited is that you play with the ones that you open in your booster pack. Again, you could replicate that in cube, but it's a lot of maintenance. It's a lot, like if you have an 8-person draft, each person in theory needs 3 sets of stickers for you to do this, and that's just a lot of maintenance and a lot of upkeep. If you want to do that, go ham. It's your cube. But generally speaking, I think it's just a bit too much of a faff, a bit too much planning than I think the average cube owner is going to be looking to make, basically.
yeah, no, absolutely agree with all that. I think the other things to note are just there's some really complex cards in this set in terms of like how to play them rules wise. So I think you kind of want to bear in mind who is going to be drafting your cube a little bit. There are some cards I think that to a newer player would be pretty tricky. And there's also probably a few cards where you kind of need to say before you start draft, how is this card going to work in this cube? For example, there's a card that references opening a sealed booster. Is that like 15 more cards of your cube if you're not drafting the entire cube, or are you expecting your players to bring along booster packs? It's yeah, you might have to do a little bit of explanation of that terms and do it before you start the draft, because you don't want people to have to ask questions after they've looked at the packs.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point. I run some of the conspiracy cards in my own cube, like one of the ones like that adds a booster pack to the draft, and there's like a draft matters one. Like before each cube, I will mention, by the way, these cards in there because if they're not, if your drafters aren't expecting these kind of things, they will be asking midway through, and that can kind of throw things off and it can kind of break the sanctity of the draft. Is that
Sanctity is a strong word for some of the drafts we've had, but yes.
yes? No, quite right. But yeah, before we kind of get in, or one last thing to kind of mention before we get in is that the draft sets they come from are a load of fun, and these cards are normally quite interesting. And I think some of these are cards that I'm personally going to be testing. So looking forward to cracking on and getting in and seeing what the set has for us. So first up, we have white and we have Park Reentry. It is 3 white for a sorcery at uncommon, and it says return up to 2 target creature cards that have a hat and or mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is an Acorn card purely because it cares about hats. I think in a Peasant Cube that this is a perfectly solid kind of top end for a maybe even aggressive but also mid-range deck. It's like even if you don't care about the hats, it is just a card that brings back 2 relevant creatures that you have already played and traded off to the battlefield. That could be the last bit of damage that you need to get through, basically. I think Peasant level is kind of where this is, and also there aren't too many reanimation spells in Peasant. You have, I think, there's the 2 white one that brings any creature back, but this is 1 more mana, but it can bring two value creatures back, that kind of thing. I think this is serviceable. This is not. I've just spent a couple of minutes talking about the wacky cards in the set. This is not that, but this is still this is an interesting bread and butter card that I think it could be quite strong.
Yeah, for sure. I suspect the Acorn had something to do with they don't want judges ruling on what is and is not a hat at tournaments. Yeah, no, it seems like a nice value play. Yeah. It kind of asks a few things of you, right? Because you want to have really impactful. This is if we're ignoring the hat bit. You need to have really impactful 2 and 3 drops if you're playing this in your creature beatdowny deck. Or yeah, you have it in a mid-range deck. Yeah, if you have Fiend Hunters and stuff, this seems quite strong. And sometimes you're gonna look at your awesome 5-drop and you'll be like, that's definitely a hat. And then that's pretty good too, I guess. Okay, next up we have Solar Flora, Intergalactic Icon, which is 3 white for a 3/3 legendary creature human guest. Auras and equipment you control attached to Solar Flora affect other creatures you control as though those auras and equipment were attached to them. Counters and stickers on Solar Flora affect other creatures you control as though they were attached to them. So this does kind of ask you to go quite all in on this card. You're playing a 5-mana 3/3 that's very easy to kill. And then you're not done. Then you're piling more mana into it and maybe more cards. Having said that, maybe those are auras that protect the card in some way. That could be quite strong. It does also ask you to have a bunch of other creatures, right? If you have this and one other creature, it's probably not that good. But you kind of need a combination of, I have some good auras, probably some other synergies with maybe something like SRAM or whatever. Or I'm doing counters, and then I have a bunch of tokens. Maybe in a +1/+1 counters deck, you can play this at top end or whatever. Because it does turn 1/1/1 counter into an anthem, which is pretty good. But it is a very killable anthem.
No, definitely. I completely agree that it is a card that is asking you to have at least 2 other cards with it for it for you to start getting value out of it. But it's just the idea of turning your Bone Splitter as a base level into an anthem, or I was looking at the equipment that I've run in the past, things like Loxodon Warhammer, or even Sword of Fire and Ice.
Yeah, that is very strong.
The ceiling of this card is insane. You could do some really obscene things with this, but I do completely agree that it is a 5-mana 3/3 that does nothing by itself. Like if you are behind, this is useless.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fun card, and I've spoken before about kind of liking the idea of a equipment style of deck, and this is an interesting card in the right cube, I think this could be good. But yeah, you are living the dream with this one a little bit, I think.
Oh yeah. But no, I could see it in the equipment deck as well. If you have stuff that cheats equip cost, this gets a lot more tenable, right? Because then, like, if your equip costs are free with like Pure Steel Paladin or whatever, and like you play this out, attach the equipment to it, and they kill it, then like that's not great for you. But you've only lost your 5 mana. You've not like lost other stuff on top of that, like if you're putting counters on it or auras or whatever.
You could look at equipment that equips itself for free. So this with a Ember Cleave could be quite spicy.
Yeah. Okay.
But then I am also looking at this with a Grafted Warger, and I think you just wipe your own board if it dies. These are the things that, like, the rule text for these are a bit weird. I think you have to directly message Mark Rosewater a lot of the time to get some clarifications on some of these things. But
Honestly, a guy seems enthusiastic enough about unsets, he probably won't even mind.
he'll probably love it, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, next up, we have our last white card. We have Trapeze Artist. It is a single white for a 2/1 creature human performer with flying. It also has the ability, and this is kind of the drawback of the card. Trapeze Artist enters the battlefield by being flipped from a height of at least 1 foot, or about 0.3 meters. If it lands face down or didn't turn over completely at least once during the flip, return it to its owner's hand. So this is a 50% chance of having a 1 mana 2/1 flyer. So you're kind of hoping by turn 2 that you have a 2/1 flyer with the potential of it coming out on turn 1. The best comparison I have for this is a card, I think, from Kaladesh called Greenbelt Rampager. That is green mana for a 3/4 that makes an energy when it comes into play, but you have to pay 2 energy or you return it to your hand. For me, this is like you have a 50% chance of this coming out on turn 1, or ideally it's coming out at the start of turn 2, kind of like the Greenbelt Rampager. The thing is, that card doesn't see much play, even though it's a good aggressive creature that you know you're going to be getting out on turn 2. This is one thing we didn't mention, is that there is a lot of variance in these unsets. They heighten the variance, and this is a powerful example of this. I think if you're in an aggressive deck, if you get this down on turn 1, you are in a very good position. You are getting in 6 to 8 damage with this if it's not answered. The flip side of that is, if you lose the first 2 or 3 flips, you're probably just losing that game. Because if you're in a white aggressive deck and you've spent turns 1 and 2 failing to cast a creature, then you have lost. What do you think of this card, James?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth about. Like, it is nice because it's only 1 mana, right? You can, if you don't succeed in getting it out on turn 1, I guess you can use it as like, oh, whenever I have a spare mana, I'll try and put this into play. It's also, I guess, kind of nice if you have like Soul Sisters or just things that reward you for creatures entering the battlefield. This can potentially enter the battlefield multiple times.
Oh, that's really nice. I didn't think about the fact that sometimes you might just want to be able to recast it again and again.
Yeah, but it is a shame with that you can't always choose to have it come back to your hand if you want, right? I don't know with the see if it doesn't turn over at least once during the flip, it comes back to your hand. Is it within the rules for me to try and not have it turn over at least once, or does that not constitute flipping?
I guess in theory you could just try and drop it like you could just drop it down.
Yeah.
And then it fails. So in theory there is that. I'm assuming there's a sportsman-like conduct thing.
Yeah, I don't
that
know.
comes with some of these cards.
But that would be abusing the spirit of the Trapeze Artist. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's super pushed. As you say, like the green one, Elden, like 3/4 for 1 is a more pushed body than 2/1 flyer for 1, and that card doesn't see play. But equally, 50% of the time, this does come down on turn 1, whereas the green one never hits play on turn 1. So yeah, I could see it. I don't think it's the worst 1-drop you could put in, especially if you're a peasant, I guess, and you're doing like white aggro or like blue-white flyers or something.
Yeah, blue-white flyers is definitely a thing that is one of the stronger things blue-white can do in that kind of format. Out of interest, if you just crossed out the flippy text,
yeah,
how strong is a 1 mana 2/1 flyer? I'm assuming very.
That card's very, very good. Yeah. Like Obviously, it scales a little bit depending on like how the upside of flying is it's harder for your opponent to block. In like a vintage cube, blocking isn't as much of how people are not dying to aggressive decks. They're not dying because they're like sweeping the board or comboing or removing or whatever. So it's definitely context dependent, but I think that card's still like not as good as Mother of Runes or the really pushed white one drops, but I think the card's very strong. Like I think you would put that card in a cube for sure. If you compare it to like Isamaru as a card which crops up in cubes, and like it's a lot better than that card.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. It would be the best Savannah Line variant.
Yeah, I think so for sure.
No, cool, makes sense. All right, do you want to take it away with our first blue card?
Nice, yeah. So first up in blue, and actually last up in blue as well, we
Yeah.
have Exchange of Words. This is 1 blue blue for an enchantment. When Exchange of Words enters the battlefield, choose 2 target creatures. For as long as Exchange of Words remains on the battlefield, exchange the text boxes of those creatures. This card's pretty interesting. You can do a lot of different stuff with it. There's some combo potential. It's kind of hard to make work. And I'm sure there are lots of things I haven't thought of. Example of something like Tree of Tradition.
Ooh, okay.
The 013, you tap it to make someone's life total equal to its toughness. You can like put that ability on your 1/1 elf, and all of a sudden it's much better. So yeah, abilities where the strength of the ability on the card is in some way limited by the stats of that card. This gets a lot better. So for example, like you can exchange the text boxes of your like 1/1 infect with your like 6/6 defender, and all of a sudden you have a 6/6 infect. And that's kind of strong. You can also use it. You don't have to target your own creatures. So if your opponent has a creature with a really strong text box, like they have a Consecrated Sphinx, you have a Lanoir Elf, you play this, you have a 1/1 Consecrated Sphinx, and they have a 4/6 Lanoir Elf. That's still pretty good. Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting card. I think it's I think it's a lot of fun to play with. I think it's probably also like will come up quite a bit as a sideboard card, just depending on like what threats you see out of your opponent. Yeah, I think it could be an interesting one to include. What do you think?
I think it seems like a fairly strong card in a control deck. The other things as well to just mention is like a lot of creatures get their value when they enter the battlefield. So you can swap your mana war or something that you have already got value out of for something that your opponent is getting repeated value out of. That could be quite strong. Like I do think it is a better in a more control-y style of deck rather than like this is not a blue removal spell, I think is the important thing. This is not a way of kind of like removing your opponent's creature. You are trying to do something interesting or something kind of broken with this, I think. Like playing this fairly, I don't think will work out well for you, is kind of
Yeah,
what I think.
I agree. It's also just a really nice sort of open-ended card to have in a cube. Like, there's a lot of cards that end up in cube that are very explicitly like tell you to do one thing, and this is like kind of leaving the question open to players to find some interesting stuff to do with this. So yeah, I like it.
Sweet. All right. Yes, that was indeed our blue card. We are now moving on to black, and we have Attempted Murder. It is X black black for a sorcery. It has choose target creature and roll X 6-sided dice. For each even result, put 2 -1/-1 counters on that creature, and for each odd result, create a 1/2 blue bird creature token with flying named Stormcrow. This is a black removal spell that can also make you 1/2 flyers. It's nice that you get that additional thing out of it. I could see in like an aristocrat deck this being a solid removal spell that gives you some bodies, and again, even in a control deck, this could be a way of finishing off a game. You could pay more mana into something and just make a load of tokens. The main issue is obviously that you have no guarantee of killing the thing you really want to kill. This is in no way unconditional removal. The variance does mean that you could end up in like not getting what you need from this. You may end up not killing the creature you want to kill, and with not enough bodies or flyers to make it kind of work. One thing to mention is that this is a uncommon, so it can go in peasant. And there was part of me, and tell me if I'm wrong, James. Is this like a bad version of? Oh no, let's be fair. A different version of Auron's Epiphany for a peasant cube. Obviously, you don't get the extra turn, which is big. But if you can dump enough mana into this, if you can dump like 8 mana into this, kill off their best creature, because most creatures in peasant, apart from like Palaka Worm, aren't super huge, and then you end up with a board of flyers. What do you think about that? Am I talking rubbish, or is that a stretch?
This is a really expensive way to kill a creature, man. Like, this is really expensive. So, because, you get, on average, this puts X -1/-1 counters on, right? Because half the time you get 2 counters. But that's just on average. Like, if you want to, in the easiest possible scenario, you're trying to kill a 1/1. Before you're confident you're killing it, you need to be spending 4 mana. Because at 3 mana it's only 50%. Even at 4 mana you might fail. And like, sure, you get a couple of birds, but then it doesn't even scale well. Like, if you're putting like 6 mana into this, like, you could cast Noxious Gearhulk for 6 mana, you always kill the thing, and you have a really good body left over. 6 mana for this, you might kill the thing if it's small, and maybe you have a Stormcrow. And outside of the memes, I think I'd rather have Noxious Gearhulk.
So what I'm hearing is it's not as good as Auron's Epiphany.
That is one of the wilder comparisons I've heard you make. Maybe tell me if I'm wrong in the comments.
I admit it was a stretch. But okay. All right, should we move on to something that I think is a bit more broken?
Yeah, let's do it. So next up we have Exit Through the Grift Shop. Love it. It is 2 and a black for sorcery. This isn't going to sound like I'm reading a magic card, but actually I am. Yell "Who wants a souvenir?" and announce the name of a non-land card in your graveyard. Each player in an ungame who can hear you may bid life. You start the bidding at 0. The high bidder loses life equal to the high bid. They copy the card and may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. If you didn't win the bid, you gain life equal to the high bid and create that many treasure tokens. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So obviously the idea here is the people in the matches around you can also bid for this. It says in an ungame. We're assuming your games are all ungames here.
If you're running this in your cube, I think you sanction all games in the cube as ungames for that.
If you're running this card, you are playing an ungame, yes. Yes, indeed. It doesn't mean your opponent can't bid.
No, exactly, yeah.
So if you're behind on life, like, even if you're on 18 and they're on 20, and you exile like a really impactful spell that would win the game, they will get that spell, right? They will just bid more life than you can bid. And like, sure, you're going to get some life and some treasure, but it gives them that choice. It's a bit of a punishing mechanic in that way. However, the added thing of other people around you being able to bid is pretty cool. Like, especially, you'd have to be quite aware of how other people's games are playing out. But like, if you're the person next to you's just started a game, right, and you exile like medium 5 mana creature, well, medium 5 mana creature on the first turn of the game for them will win them the game. So they'll bid like loads of life, and then, so what do you get out of that? So say they bid like 12 life. Seems like a reasonable thing for someone to want to do. You'll then gain 12, get 12 treasure tokens. That's really good for 3 mana. That's pretty busted. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you can play this in some sort of, in like a storm deck as like a big ritual. Maybe you can just play it in a ramp deck. But you do need to have something good in your graveyard to exile. So basically, that's a lot of words that I really have no idea if this card's good, but it seems cool and interesting.
I think this card could be I think it's actually too strong, or for a number of reasons, which I'll kind of get. So I think in a reanimated deck, this is just it reanimates your thing. Like this is a human more for a reanimate. Like
But if you're reanimating your Gristlebrand,
yeah,
your opponent can also bid for it, right? Unless you're ahead of them on life.
that is the key part. Like
Yeah.
you need to be at least one life more than your opponent to play this card. Completely agree with that. I think you're just like you can play this in a reanimation deck as another copy of Reanimate, and it'll be very good. And if you get your opponent, if someone from a different game wins it, you get all the treasure and you get the life back, which will probably give you enough time to hardcast your next party. Where I think this where this could be too broken is that this could lead to some monumental feel bads in the games around you because it can completely screw over. Like someone could be like there could be parity or something like that, or someone just like scavenging ooze or like something like that, and just gain some life so they're ahead, and then they can bring back something in their game and just completely ruin and you could completely ruin another game of Magic with this, and I think that could just lead to feel bads in terms of like a Cuban, like a healthy Cuban environment. I think you could just end up with players being actively annoyed at this card.
Yeah, no, I kind of totally agree. Actually, thinking about that play pattern, like, imagine you're on the game next to him. You go like, "I'll pass a turn, I'll crack my fetch land, so I'm gonna go to 19," and then the person next to you plays this. You like tries to get back a Gristlebrand. You now can't win your game, because you can't bid more life than your opponent, and it like had nothing to do with anything you or your opponent did.
Yeah, exactly.
That seems pretty rough. I agree.
From a card that is very unprintable in a real Magic set to a card that is actually printable and legal in a lot of Magic formats. We have Saw in Half. It is 2 and a black for an instant. Destroy target creature. If that creature dies this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are copies of that creature, except their base power is half that creature's power and their base toughness is half that creature's toughness, round up each time. I think that this is another strong black card. I think this is really, really good with like enter the battlefield or leave battlefield effects. If you play this after you've played your Ravenous Chupacabra or after your Wormcoil Engine, that is such gas. That is insane. Just getting double those, like copying getting double of those just seems insane. Like even cutting a Grave Titan in half, you'll end up with 2 mini Grave Titans that have made you 4 tokens each, all that kind of stuff. Like the value stuff is where I'm seeing this. Like, is there any combo potential to this, James, or is it just like cutting an awesome creature in half and having 2 still awesome creatures? Is that what you think?
Yeah, no, there's definitely some combo stuff going on here as well. Yeah, I agree with you about all the ETB stuff. Wormcoil Engine sounds ridiculous, but yeah, it's surprisingly flexible because also it's really a lot of creatures that you just don't care about the power and toughness. Like, even at a pinch, it's kind of nice that it doesn't kill 1/1s, right? Like, if you just needed another mana, you can like Saw and half your Llanowar Elf, and then you have 2 Llanowar Elves. Like there's a lot of potential. You can also use it on your opponent's stuff. It's rarely going to be correct to do so, I think, but it might be good just to like buy you a bit of time if just to remove a creature from combat. But yeah, in general, you can be targeting your own stuff, I think. Yeah, onto combos. So I think the easiest way to break this that I can see is if you have creatures that copy spells. So I'm thinking here like Dualcaster Mage, or I think there's a wizard as well, Nari Meha, the Wizard Lord. So how that would work is you need another creature in play initially to target with this. So you cast Saw in Half on your other creature. In response to Saw in Half, you cast a Dualcaster Mage. So you need 6 mana here. Dualcaster Mage is going to enter a battlefield, copy Saw in Half. The copy of Saw in Half is going to target Dualcaster Mage. That will then get you 2 more Dualcaster Mages, and the original copy of Saw in Half is still on the stack. So they can both copy that Saw in Half again, and you end up with infinite Dualcaster Mages. And these don't They don't have haste, but they also don't go away at the end of turn. You just have infinite dual caster mages.
Or dual custom makers flash as well. So you could do this on your opponent's end step and then untap, and then you.
Yeah, absolutely. Some good Splinter Twin vibes. There's and the nice thing as well is this can go in a deck with other creatures where it does stuff with. It doesn't have to just be a combo piece. It can be like value card that sometimes combos. And you can also do stuff with like Eternal Witness. So like, and obviously again, Saw in Half on Eternal Witness sounds pretty good anyway. But yeah, because you will get.
Can you get it back?
Yes, so that's the thing. So Saw in Half on Eternal Witness anyway is really good already. It's just 2 regrowths for 3 mana. If you have Lion's Eye Diamond and Eternal Witness, you'll Saw in Half your Eternal Witness. So you get 2 regrowths. One of them gets back Lion's Eye Diamond, one of them gets back Saw in Half. That will then give you 3 mana to Saw in Half again. So you'll get infinite Eternal Witnesses.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which is kind of cute. And all of this stuff also gets you like death triggers and whatnot as well, if that's something you care about. And I'm sure these aren't the only. That would obviously work with any way that lets you go plus 3 mana. With a little more setup. But yeah, I mean that's actually like a pretty efficient little combo. And with cards you might want to put in your deck anyway. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. I think this is a really cool card. I'm sure there are other great combos with this card. Please put them in the comments. I want to read them. Okay, first up in red we have Devil K Neville. Devil K Neville is 2 in a red for a 2/1 legendary creature Devil Performer. Has haste, and when Devil K Neville enters the battlefield, jump it over any number of creatures. If it clears those creatures, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. What does that mean? Well, you can see a demonstration at devilkneville.com. If you go to devilkneville.com, you get a lovely video of Kathleen DeVere from LRR showing you how jumping works. So you basically you pick how many cards you're going for. So if you think you can jump it over 3 creatures, for example, you'd line up 3 cards, and then on the edge of the table, you put Devil K Neville sort of half overlapping the edge, and flip it upwards, and try and jump over that creature.
It's kind of like a beer mat, isn't it?
Exactly. I in fact did some field research here. I tried it. I think you, and I found you could most of the time get 3, sometimes 4. That makes this card really good.
With practice as well. Like if this is in the cube for a while, you could be.
Oh yeah, you're giving your players homework if this is included. Yeah, no, you can because if you can even just get reliably 3, then this is a 5/4 haste for 3 mana. That's really strong.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to be fair, like if you can jump over 2 creatures, I think you're still happy with this.
Yeah, that's not at all bad.
3 mana for a 4/3 haste is if you consider that like the minimum you're going for, I think that's pretty solid. The one thing to mention though is that you do need the creature. Like, do the creatures have to be on the battlefield already? On an empty board, can this jump over things that don't exist?
That's an excellent point, and one that I had not considered. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Yeah, so this actually isn't often going to be great really early because yeah, you need creatures in play. If your opponent's not playing creatures, this is pretty awkward. This could be tricky, right?
I think in a red aggressive deck though, like you have hopefully gone 1-drop, 2-drop, and then this is your 3rd creature. That's kind of why I was like saying like at 2, I think you're still happy with it. If you're in an aggressive red deck, there's probably going to be 2 to 3 creatures on the board already when this comes out. I would say, in theory, you've gone 1-drop, 2-drop. You've swung in. They may not have wanted to trade off their good creature for like a Goblin Guide or something like that. So I could see there being 2 to 3 creatures on the board. If you're playing this on curve, if you're playing this later, I think go ham with it. Like if in a board stall, what do you have to lose? Like go for 10, go for broke. Why not?
Yeah, it's worth noting that if you fail, you fail and you get nothing.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, you make it as big as you need to, I guess. But yeah, there is an issue with that where yes, ideally you're going 1-drop, 2-drop this, but you don't want your 3-drop to only be good when you've gone 1-drop, 2-drop, and sometimes they kill your 2-drop, sometimes they block it. Things happen to your creatures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the haste is nice. I don't think it's the best 3-drop in mono red, but I think it's like perfectly reasonable to put in. Don't know. There's like 3 different Rabble Masters at this point, which will kind of do a lot more.
If this made 1/1s instead of counters, I think this would be actually quite playable.
Yeah,
I would probably put this in if instead of +1 counters, it made 1/1 goblins.
yeah, that's totally fair.
All right, next up we have Trigger Happy. It is 1 and a red for an instant. It has choose a triggered ability of target permanent. It triggers, you control that ability. So this is one that I'm probably going to be throwing at James quite swiftly. But before I do, at a base level, this effectively re-triggers your enter the battlefield phase. This is, in an odd way, a flicker effect in red, which is not something you see at all. So if you want to re-trigger your Ravenous Chupacabra or any of your kind of flicker targets, this basically does that. You don't get any leaves or anything that specifically cares about the creature leaving or entering the battlefield. So like Perforos won't trigger, for example. You will get the effect of the enter the battlefield again. That, like, as a base level, that could be quite strong. The way Magic is going, like, there's just so many like value cards that you get that ETB straight away. That means that at a base level, this is probably a solid card. James, what's your take on this? And is there anything?
Yeah, I'm here for combos really with this one. So I think the most the most kind of obvious thing that this will do in a lot of cubes is this flips Dark Depths on its own. Dark Depths is a triggered ability when it has 0 counters on it. Transform it, make a merit lage, yada yada yada. This can just trigger that ability. So that's really strong. We always see like Vampire Hexmage and the like getting played in cube, but like mostly just to do that. Like, so it has some other utility, but so does this. Yeah, as you say, it on top of all that combo stuff, it can trigger your ETBs and your death triggers and whatnot. There's if you wanted to really lean into this cards, there's like more combo stuff you can definitely do. I I did a Scryfall search for stuff that wins the game as a triggered ability. There's a card called Darksteel Reactor. It's a really bad artifact, but it only costs like 4 mana. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly what you need to do to win the game with it fairly, but yeah, this you can do all of those things. I think because like cheating triggered abilities is not really something we see in regular Magic sets. There are a lot of triggered abilities that they don't factor in that you might be able to cheat it when they're making those cards. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff you can do here. And yeah, there's also your fail cases will not be that bad. Re-triggering an ETB or a death trigger. You can also trigger things on your opponent's side of the battlefield, which could come up if they have like detrimental triggers for certain situations. But yeah, I think Dark Depths is the one that is already in a lot of cubes, and this could like be a nice piece for that deck.
Yeah, that's I didn't clock that. That's very interesting. That actually might push me to give this a go because I have Dark Depths Thespian stage and I am running Vampire Hexmage for that. The fact that the lands deck does want to it wants to be green, but the secondary color in that is kind of red,
Yeah,
more than black, and especially more than the double black plip of.
yeah, much more castable. Yeah, I could see that.
That's interesting. Nice. No, I like that.
Cool. Next up we have Opening Ceremony. It is 4 red for sorcery. You add 1 generic mana and a Wooburg, so 1 of each color, to your mana pool. You may open a sealed magic booster pack. Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among cards in that booster pack. So you kind of need to decide before the draft how exactly you're implementing this. Like, I'm guessing most people aren't gonna just like bring a random box of the recent Magic set with them in case someone puts Opening Ceremony in their deck. The most obvious way to me to do this is like if you have more cards in your cube than are going to be drafted, then you just take 15 of the undrafted cards, and that's a booster pack. And if you're doing it like that, this card's honestly like pretty good card advantage. Because obviously, like the mana fixes you to cast off color spells. Like you're gonna hit some good stuff in 15 cards. And it's like these are 15 cards that the person decided to put in the cube. They're presumably not all awful. Yeah, it gives you most of that mana back, and plus, like, if so, you can cast 6 mana worth of stuff from that pack straight up. But also, if you had more than 6 mana when you cast it, then you can use your additional mana to do that. Worth noting, it is cast spells. You can't play lands from the booster pack, but yeah, I think this is not at all bad. It's 6 mana card advantage, so it's like it's not like you're paying mana for a card draw spell in the traditional sense, because presumably the cards you're casting will be affecting the board and doing something straight away, and it does give you the 6 mana back. But it's like the question is, you get to 6 mana, would you rather be like casting this or casting like an Inferno Titan or whatever? But I think there's spots where this would be better, and I think it's a really fun card. It's like I could definitely see including it. You probably you're going to need some mana ramp in your deck. You're probably not just going to want to try and get to 6 lands and cast this, but if you're doing that, I could totally see it in a big artifact deck maybe.
Yeah, I personally quite like the additional, like the way of adding a booster pack to a draft. So in mine we have Lore Seeker, which adds a booster pack to the draft itself, and as James mentioned, like that is just another 15 cards from the box. But I have seen people. The other card like this is Booster Tutor, which is another uncard, and I've seen people make their own dedicated Booster Tutor packs for this. That one had power in it, and that one kind of made Booster Tutor almost a first pick. But that was very cool, and I think this card is interesting. If you haven't played with one of these cards in your cube, I think it's worth give it a go. It is fun when it comes up. The fact that this can come up multiple times over the course of over the games, so it can come up in every game that you're playing, is cool, because you can always do something a bit different with your deck. Yeah, I think you're right in that it wants to be in a deck with a lot of mana, but also like in a spells deck where you're copying spells, that could be quite good, because you could end up netting yourself a ton of mana opening like 2 or 3 booster packs and just getting the best cards from them. I think that could be.
Oh, that's great! Yeah,
that's actually a win condition, I think. Actually,
that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, there's multiple sort of 2 mana copy a spell effects. Like, yeah, so if you cast this plus a copy spell for 2 mana, you're spending 8 mana, but you're getting 12, and you're getting like 30 cards. You're presumably you can win the game from there.
Yeah, you are probably winning after that happens, because you're seeing so many cards from the draft that there's going to be win conditions in there, I think. But
yeah, it is worth noting that you get 12 mana, but there will still be cards you can't cast based on colors. Like, you can't create a Huff off this, for example, and if you don't have more green mana.
Yeah, well, like when you mentioned it earlier, it's like, oh, you can't actually cast Inferno Titan off this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Double burn. Yeah. So there will be probably some spots where you actually, if you're not copying this, you want to get to like 7 or 8 as much as anything, so you can have that extra colored mana. Because a lot of cards in cubes tend to have double pips in.
All right, moving on to our one and only green card, we have Killer Cosplay. This is a single green for an artifact equipment. When Killer Cosplay becomes attached to a creature, choose a creature card name with an identical mana cost. That creature becomes a copy of the card with the chosen name until Killer Cosplay becomes unattached to it, and it has equip for 3. So I think this actually has quite a lot of interesting play to it. The base line I thought of this is turning a 1/1, turning your mana dork into a Phyrexian Dreadnought.
It's worth noting that is super strong. It does have to be a colorless 1-drop, though. It is identical mana cost, not
Oh, it's identical.
mana value. I believe that means it would have to be a single generic mana,
Right.
or your card that cost a single green, you could only turn into a creature that cost also cost a single green mana.
Right. Okay. Yes, it was. Sorry, it was mana value that replaced CMC, wasn't it? Not mana cost.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. So we'll scrap the Phyrexian Dreadnought plan, but it's still technically it is doable, just not as doable.
Yeah, I mean, if you have like artifacty stuff in your cube, maybe like Gingerroot or Signal Pest or like those can turn to Phyrexian Dreadnought, that would be super strong. Yeah.
Yeah. That rules clarification kind of ruins the rest of my notes because I was like, oh, you could turn off any 5-drop into a Kiki Chiki or anything else into a persist combo creature, but it's still an interesting card with a lot of play. Like there's plenty of cards with good activated abilities. Just having the utility of like turning any 2-drop into like a Scavenging Ooze could be quite strong. And you're literally, is it like 100,000 magic cards now or something like that? You're basically like with every permutation you're going to have a good you're going to have at least a few thousand cards to pick from with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card's cool. It's I mean, say you have a few thousand cards to pick from. The cards you have to pick from are the magic cards that you remember. So I think it is fair to say you can't get your phone out and start scry falling when you draw this card. Like, oh, there must be something for like one black that gets me out of this. But
yeah, if you start typing in the mana value and then destroy target or like the thing for that exact moment, that's a bit far.
yeah, the round could go on for hours at that point. But I think this card still does really interesting stuff. Actually, one of the spots I see it is in combo decks. Like if you're in a creature combo deck, but this is kind of redundancy-ish for some of your combo. Like if you didn't get like a particular combo piece you really wanted, say you were doing Druid combo, but you never saw Vizier of Remedies. Well, you could like play Stoneforge Mystic, say, go and get this, and then turn Stoneforge Mystic into Vizier of Remedies, and when you have your Druid out and pop off with Druid, or you can turn your Scavenging Ooze into a Druid when you didn't draw a Druid. So I think maybe it has some like interesting creature combo applications, but you have to be like very much building your deck to do that, and like prioritizing cards with that mana value.
That makes sense, but like I do like that flexibility. One of the issues with combos in Cube is just like if your cube is above 360, if your cube has more cards in it than you are going to see in the draft, it means that you have to run additional combo pieces so that you maintain the chance of seeing them. Basically, it makes the deck viable. If this could be a kind of catch-all role player that you can pick up early, if you have one half of a combo, you can pick this up early, and then you're just looking for the other half. It does make it like because you would need those two cards. It's kind of it's rather than A plus B equals combo. This is A plus B plus C equals combo, but you still have access to it in your deck. So that is interesting.
Sure, yeah, and there's and then the other thing it does, right, is it gets like it can become a hate card that isn't in your deck. Like say your opponent's an artifact deck and you have your Scavenging Ooze out and you're like, that's the wrong sort of hate, that's graveyard hate. Well, this can turn it into a Collector Roof and then turns off all your opponent's mana rocks. And yeah, as you say, there's a lot of cards in Magic. If you know enough of them, you'll be able to find creatures that get you out of a lot of different situations. Also worth noting, it's kind of nice with like delve creatures or creatures that have a bigger cost relative to a turn you can play them. But again, you'd have to, if you had a Tasker out, for example, you need to have in mind like these are good creatures with this identical mana cost that I can turn it into. Also, by the way, last note on this, I believe the joke here is that it is a grizzly bear cosplaying as a Tarmogoyf, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is adorable. I love it. Okay, next up we have the first of our gold cards, Captain Rex Nebula. It is 1 red white for a 2/2 legendary creature human pilot employee. It has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target non-land permanent you control becomes a vehicle artifact until end of turn. Its base power and toughness are each equal to its mana value. It has Crew 2 and the ability Crash Land. Whenever this vehicle deals combat damage, roll a 6-sided die. If the result is equal to this vehicle's mana value, it deals that much damage to any target, then sacrifice this vehicle. And to be clear, the second whole part of that, the crash land ability, that is just something the vehicle you create has. That's not something this creature inherently has. So that's a tremendously complicated card. Well, you've helpfully given me a note on this one, which is might take me a while to get to, but and I think so. The power there comes from the fact that this ability can make a creature into something that isn't a creature. When something becomes a vehicle artifact until end of turn, it is no longer a creature until it is crewed. And as Daniel's helpfully written for me in the notes, that combos very well with Devoted Druid. You can keep putting -1/-1 counters on it to untap it, make infinite mana, and it won't die from having less than 0 toughness because it's not a creature. In terms of using this on the fair, doesn't seem great to me. Outside of that combo application, because it scales with mana value. That's either you're using it on something big, in which case you probably don't want to sacrifice it in a lot of spots, and even if you did want to sacrifice it, well, your opponent can just chump block it to. Oh, sorry, actually, I misread this. This ability is whenever it deals damage, so that can be to a creature. It's not deals damage to a player. So I guess it does do a thing of So I guess it does do the thing of like I have my like Gurmag Angler, which is actually cheap but costs 8 mana. I turn it into an 8/8. When it attacks, it's going to deal damage either to a blocker or a player, assuming they don't remove it. And then I can like sack it and deal that much damage to something. Yeah, that's maybe okay. It's a lot of setup. And you're not like inherently getting up a card there or anything if you're just doing this on a normal creature. Like you make your 3/3 into a vehicle, you crew it with this, you hit them, you can like then sack it to lightning bolt something, but like probably you're not actually inherently getting ahead there. There are spots where that will be good, but it's not such a powerful ability that I want to put a 3-mana 2/2 in my deck. I don't think.
No, I would agree. I think part of this is I think I said this before on the last review we did, but Boris is just kind of boring, and to me, this and the next card we're going to get to are interesting. At least, like doing stuff with vehicles, I do quite like. For me, I thought this was worth mentioning because of that combo. We've added we have Swift reconfiguration,
Yeah.
which also combos with Devoted Druid, but that has the benefit of also just being a perfectly fine removal spell.
Yeah. So sorry, not to remove the card. I do think it is very possibly worth including if you have Devoted Druid in your cube, because Swift reconfiguration is a really good include in those spots because it's a good card independent of Devoted Druid. But also most people, if you're playing Druid in your deck, you also have like Vizier of Remedies in your deck, which is an awful card when you're not comboing Devoted Druid. It doesn't do anything. And this is probably better than Vizier in a lot of spots. Like, yeah, it costs 1 more mana, but you get a little more utility out of it, right?
No, that's a fair point. Yeah. Vizier is a fairly unexpiring creature. It dies to a stiff breeze. Like this only has 1 more toughness, but at least it can do something. Has the option of doing something more interesting as well. So
sure.
Moving on to our next Boros card, we have a good pupper now. We have Comet Stellar Pup. It is 2 red-white for a legendary Planeswalker Comet with 5 starting loyalty. It has 1 loyalty ability, which is 0, roll a 6-sided dice. So on a roll of a 1 or 2, you add 2 loyalty, then create 2 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens. They gain haste until end of turn. On the roll of a 3, you remove 1 loyalty and then return a card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. On a roll of a 4 or 5, Comet Stellar Pup deals damage equal to the number of loyalty counters on him to a creature or player, then -2 loyalty. And then if you roll a 6, you add 1 loyalty and you activate Comet Stellar Pup's loyalty ability 2 more times this turn, which means you get to roll 2 more dice basically, because that's the actual loyalty ability. All those abilities are pretty solid. I think just as a value planeswalker, this is between fine and quite good. Obviously, the issue is the variance of the thing. That's kind of one of the downsides with a lot of the cards in unsets is the variance. The only one that kind of really doesn't get you anything that can actually just brick you is if you roll a 3 and you don't have a card to return from your graveyard to your hand. But apart from that, I think if you're putting this in your deck, you're kind of putting it in knowing that you are a mid-range deck and kind of most of these abilities you're kind of generally happy with. The other reason I wanted to talk about this is because there has been discussions of this in Eternal formats. There's some people talking about running this in Legacy with some things that modify the dices so that you basically always rolling a 6. I'm not sure if that means you then just go infinite with it, or if you can modify the dice rolls to get what you want, so you can keep rolling dice and just keep making creatures, or keep getting stuff back, or keep pinging out your opponents, that kind of thing. Obviously, in those formats where you can build your whole deck around it, you know what you're getting. You can have 4 of these. You can have 4 of each of the cards that modify it. It is better there than in the cube. But as just a value planeswalker, I think this is pretty good to interesting.
Yeah, I quite like it actually. The randomness is annoying, and it's annoying because it's not that any of these abilities are bad. It's that you can't plan for what it's gonna do in the way that you want to. Like you can't say, "Oh, I really need to kill that creature. I'll play Comet and kill it," because Comet has a pretty good chance of not killing it. Having said that, all the abilities do something. Like 2/1/1s at least will trump block fairly well and hopefully keep Comet alive. And if the board's empty, you can get in. They have haste. The 3, this is the only one that can whiff, obviously, but the fact that this isn't like creature card with mana value 2 or less. This is just a card, so it can get a land back. It can get your cantrip.
You can get your wasteland back.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Or just your cheap spell or whatever. I think you're most of the time going to have a target. 4 or 5 removal, great. And 6, you're very happy. Yeah, I'm sure you could if your cube has a dice rolling theme with Krark's Thumb, then I'm sure this gets into it. But I think this, I don't think you need to do work. I think this is just a pretty solid value planeswalker. I think if you compare it to something like Viajani for a similar cost, this probably comes out ahead on average. 5 loyalty is a lot on a 4-mana planeswalker. I quite like it.
I think as well that it fits in most Borisy decks. Like Borisy decks in cubes often care about tokens. They have token strategies with Winota, that kind of stuff. They care about that. Returning something back, return your lightning bolt, return your lightning helix, something like that. That is good. This coming down dealing 5. Shockingly, the 2 traditionally aggressive colors in Magic wouldn't mind pinging a creature or a player for 5. When it comes down, I think I think it's interesting. I think it's solid.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it. Also, as with basically all planeswalkers, if you can get this out ahead of curve, it will reward you for that. Just because it's less likely to die from creatures. Nice. Okay, next up we have Space Bellerman. I'm sure you all get the joke. Space Bellerman is 2 white blue for a legendary planeswalker Jace. It starts with 3 loyalty, and it has the ability Space Sculptor. Space Bellerman divides the battlefield into alpha, beta, and gamma sectors. If a creature isn't assigned to a sector, its controller assigns it to one. Opponents assign first. I agree. This does not sound like a Magic card either, but this is where we're at.
This is one that's legal in older formats as well.
Allegedly, yes. um, yeah. Also has some loyalty abilities. +1. Creatures in each sector can be blocked this turn only by creatures in the same sector. -1. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature in the sector of your choice. -5. Destroy all creatures in the sector of your choice. Alright, so there's some stuff to unpick here. I think how you most often want to play this. So if this comes down, your opponents have to divide up their creatures into these sectors first. I think normally what's going to happen is they're going to have to spread their creatures out, right? If it's a fairly built-out board, because putting them all in one just gives you more options. So they'll have to spread theirs out. And I think often what you'll want to do to take advantage of that +1 is whichever sector doesn't have a bunch of good blockers in, you can just put all of your creatures in that sector. And then, yeah, it will make your creatures very, very hard for them to block. And that also takes best advantage of the -1 because you want all your creatures in one sector so they all get a counter. And if you get to the -5, that will kill 1 or 2 creatures, and that'll be pretty good. A lot of the issue I have with this card, to be honest, in terms of putting it in a cube, is the tracking situation.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I don't really know how you represent this like cleanly on a like built out
Custom
board.
playmats, James. Custom
Custom
playmat.
playmats, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, to be fair, I was thinking like, oh, on turn 4 or 5, this comes down and it's fine. But actually, yeah, if you're playing this late into a board stall,
Exactly.
like I think it will break the board stall. I think it is powerful enough that it will break
I
a board
agree.
stall.
I agree.
But it's I guess similar to the reason we're not talking about many of the stick or any of the sticker cards or the attractions is because the added level of faffing around that you need to get this to be good, or actually no, not to be good, to just use the card
Play
in the
a
first
legal
place.
game of Magic with
Yeah,
this card.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The really gross thing is, so often you'll play your Jace, you'll faff around with sectors, they'll kill the Jace, you can go back to normal, right? Wrong. You still have to keep tracking creatures in sectors for all of the rest of the game.
I didn't. Oh, okay.
Because if Jace comes back or your opponent played a Jace, etc., etc., it's like day night in that regard.
Right. Okay.
So
Like,
for 10 turns later, when your opponent plays their questing beast, you'll be like, oh, do you want to put it in alpha, beta, or gamma? And no one wants this. No one wants this.
I'm going to play this in Commander just to really annoy everyone I know. I'm not
Yeah,
doing that. I'm not
yeah,
doing
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't like your friends, put this in your commander deck. But yeah, I almost don't want to put it in a cube just because of that. I don't know what you think.
No, that's completely fair. Like I think it's powerful, but if you are playing this, you kind of know about it first. You can kind of prepare for it. I think everything you said, I think, is exactly right. Like, but I did not fully take on board the amount of additional work this requires to actually just to just play Magic, which is kind of what we're here for. So yeah, it's probably strong, and my wife plays a lot of Legacy, and I hope this is not playable. That's all
Yeah,
I'm saying.
yeah, I think you're not alone there. Yeah, no, if you were putting it in your cube, this is probably pretty good if you're like a very creature heavy deck. I'd almost want to play it as like a splash out of White Weenie more than anything else. I think there'll be a lot of blue decks where this doesn't really do anything because you just don't have enough creatures.
We're on the home stretch now. We are moving on to colorless. We have standard procedure. It does not have a mana cost, but it is an instant with an activated ability, because why not? It has 1 reveal standard procedure from your hand. Choose an instant or sorcery card with mana value 3 or less currently legal in the standard format. Standard procedure becomes a copy of that card until end of turn. This is generally going to play out as 3 mana for a Lightning Strike or 3 mana for a Doomblade. Obviously, just on rate, it's annoying having to pay 1 more for that spell, but the flexibility to make it anything legal at that time, I think, could be quite interesting. And also the fact that as a cube designer, this is 1 card that in theory can go into anyone's deck. I don't think it would be, but this could, in theory, like this could be pack one, pick one for anyone because you have all the flexibility in the world. Obviously, it's standard, so the power level will go up and down. Cards will go in and out. That's why I was generally like the base level is it is a lightning strike or a doom blade. It is one of those cards that will deal damage or remove something. It's like you know there's going to be a solid removal spell.
So this is never going to be the most efficient card in the world, right? But very often you're willing to take a less efficient deal for some flexibility, and this is sort of the ultimate of that effect. This is basically, this is any cheap spell you want. Like, yeah, there'll be the other spots where it's like, even in standard right now, there's like cut down. Cut down's a really good efficient removal spell. I'm perfectly happy playing that for 2 mana. But also sometimes what you really want is a duress, and this is a duress. Sometimes you're out of gas and there's and you need to get some creatures back. There's like Urborg Repossession, for example. You can restock your hand that way. I think this card's actually pretty strong. I think that flexibility of just being like whatever you want at any point in the game is obviously only out of cheap cards, but I think that's pretty strong. Like it won't be the best card in your cube, but I think it's like a card that will go in a lot of decks, and I could see running it. I could see running it. I think there actually probably won't be that many decks that are super unhappy with this. Probably a ramp deck. It's not great because I don't. There's not like a rampant growth in standard currently. I don't believe, and like even if there was, you don't want to spend.
There's probably a 3 mana one, but yeah.
Yes, then it costs 4 if you're casting it with this. That's pretty bad, and um, you know, the ramp decks generally aren't that interested in a bunch of cheap interaction, which is what this would normally end up being. But I think in most other decks this is actually fine. Like in a control deck, it seems great. It's like super flexible. Any sort of interaction think about playing something like Coligan's command or something. Like none of the modes of that are so good you would play it, but it's that flexibility, and this is sort of the ultimate in that. And then even in an aggressive deck, honestly, like you do still need removal to get blockers out of the way, or like if your opponent's doing some combo stuff, then you can get a discard spell, or even some situationally there are some like hate spells that come in the form of instants or sorcerers. There's my knowledge of standard right now probably isn't good enough, but like I think things like Shattering Spree would be really, really good to turn this into something like Hallowed Moonlight against tokens. Yeah, I could see this doing some work.
No, definitely. And one thing as well, which I like because when we were talking about killer cosplay, the permutations of what you could make were so big. This limits you to standard, and you also still have to be able to cast it. So you still need the mana to cast it. So if you are a red-black deck, you only have to look at the red-black instant sorceries from standard, and that's something you can do quite relatively quickly before the cube starts. You can just have a little idea in your head of okay, these things are legal, that kind of thing. Like obviously there is the case of someone could be niche and like looking for individual things, but it is a good amount of variety, but it's not all of the variety, so that you are going deep into Scryfall midway through a game to try and find a creature to turn your thing into. Whereas with this, you can pre-plan a bit better, I think, basically, which is I think a plus for.
Yeah, that checks out. It seems like pretty sensible limitation. There's probably more mentioning with the killer cosplay, but I think it sort of applies to this as well. I think including these cards, you do want to be a bit careful. I think this can be kind of a feel bad if you're someone who like maybe isn't quite as invested in Magic as the other people who they're playing with, and it's like they haven't heard of all the cards that the people are turning their card into, and it's like, well, they don't have a copy of the card, so it's like you're just getting it up on the phone, and it's the people who don't play quite as regularly are already at a big disadvantage, and I think it could be kind of a feel bad when people just keep naming cards that you've never heard of and turning their creatures or their spells into them. Like I think in a lot of spots it would be fine, but like that's I think up to the cube designer to make that decision. I think a lot of cubes. I think this would be really cool, but I think it is just worth considering.
I guess kind of like it goes back to what you said at the start, which I do completely agree with. Of like, if you are playing a card like this, or any card that kind of messes around with the rules or isn't what people expect, it's just give people it's a simple heads up before the cube draft just starts. Just like literally when you have your 8 players down, just give them a TLDR of anything they need to look out for that's out of the ordinary. Like in mine, it's all Snowlands. I tell everyone that before we start, just because it is important for people to know that kind of thing. And like if you're including a card like this or any card that kind of messes around with stuff, just be courteous and be mindful of your cubers, because you want everyone to enjoy it and come back for more cube. You don't want anyone to have a feel bad or anything like that at all.
Sure.
Completely agree.
Okay, nice. Next up, we are starting the artifact. We have Clown Car. It is X generic mana for a artifact vehicle. It's a 1/1 with crew 1, and when Clown Car enters the battlefield, you roll X 6-sided dice. For each odd result, create a 1/1 white clown robot artifact creature token. For each even result, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Okay, so I think with these X spells, it's often just worth picking some reasonable X's and seeing what they look like. So let's say we're casting this for 4 mana. On average, obviously there's some variation here. We're gonna get a 3/3 crew 2, which is pretty bad, and 2 1/1s. Compare that to something like a Seeker's Chariot, and you're going to be really unhappy. Obviously, there's a lot of upside here in that, like, it's generic mana and it scales. But the thing is, this is so unimpactful at when X is very small that I think really, you're looking at it as something to like ramp into. But then even when it gets huge, it's like, even when X is like 10, it's like, you're gonna get like some tokens and a reasonable sized vehicle, but it's not ending the game on the spot big. It's not even anything close to even like a mere battle sphere at that point. Yeah, I'm not sure I love it. I could see doing this some stuff with like Mishra's Workshop or whatever if you're just as like, because if you have that stuff going, then sometimes just like any artifact sync, any mana sync that's an artifact can be pretty good. But doesn't seem great to me. What do you think?
No, I think playing this fairly, you're completely right. If you're just ramping and playing X for this, there's better things. Like there's Stone Coil Serpent, which is X, which is just like added space level, is just a better card. Where this gets a bit more interesting is if you have infinite mana.
Oh, sure.
In tournament play, I can see this being miserable, and like they won't do something Omega, because I'm pretty sure your opponent can just make like okay, I have infinite mana. Like, okay, roll the dice.
Oh, infinite 6-sided dice.
Exactly, but like in a nice, friendly, casual cube environment, I think you can say, quotation fingers, I roll a million dice. Can I have half and half? And that's something that you can kind of come to an agreement with your opponent. One thing that I've seen people talk about this with is like working. It does work in the Bomberman combo. So with Auriac Salvagers and Lion's Eye Diamond or Black Lotus, because the Auriac Salvagers can bring this back as well from the graveyard. So if it's milled early or if it's removed,
Oh, that's cool.
that is a way. Like basically, that generates infinite mana, and it's an infinite mana combo. And then this is the win condition for that combo. This replaces like Pyrite Spellbomb, which is another which is a cheap artifact that kind of pings people out.
Sure.
This can replace that by letting you dump all the mana into all the infinite mana into this, and then you have an infinitely wide board and an infinitely large Clown Calf with crew 2. This is a combo card for me. If you are running something like Bomberman or infinite combos in your cube, this is a outlet for that, I think.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that Bomberman angle. I think if you're just like making infinite colorless mana, there are probably a lot of better things to do, because this doesn't win you the game that turn, right? You're gonna pass.
No, exactly. It like this is still nowhere near like Walking Ballista good.
Yeah.
But there are spaces between this and Walking Ballista. So like for example, right now I do run Stonecoil Serpent in my cube. There's a couple of infinite mana combos in there. If I added say for example, if I added more infinite mana combos, this becomes it is not as good fairly as Stonecoil Serpent, but it has that potential of being a combo card. So that's kind of like you take a bit off of one card for one deck to boost up another deck. Like that's kind of where I'm seeing it. If you want that additional level of redundancy for your
Yeah,
X spells, like big X spells, yeah.
that makes total sense. As a thing to do with infinite mana, this is less good for Walking Ballista, but a lot better than Stonecoil Serpent, right? Because Stonecoil Serpent, they fatal push, you don't have anything. This, you have infinite clowns, which is a good place to be.
Yeah. Spot on. So last up for today, we have Park Map. It is one generic for an artifact, which has one and sacrifice Park Map. Search your library for a land card that doesn't have the same art as a permanent you control. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this might actually low-key be the card I think that will be played most from this set. This is effectively a better version of Expedition Map. Expedition Map is too generic. It's very similar, but it's too generic and can get any card from your deck and put it into your hand. This is only one to activate. Like in Cube, where all your non basic lands are singleton, and in a lot of cubes, I would imagine that everyone's art is the same, but it basically reads you can't get a land that you already have, which I think is a fair drawback. Um, just it does so much and asks so little of you. All you have to do is put this in your deck and have a land, and you can go and get any other land from your deck. You can get a piece of your Dark Decks combo. You can get your Cradle or your Tolarian Academy. You can get your Wasteland. But you can go and get your Urza's Saga, or this can be gotten by Urza's Saga. Like there's just it is so simple. It is cheap. It is efficient, and I think it's probably and it's also a common for any pauper players out there as well. It can go and get any of your pieces. I just think it's a very good card that asks so little that I think is going to see the most play of any card on this that we have spoken about.
Yeah, I 100% agree with it, actually. This card seems pretty busted to me. Shaving a mana off Expedition Map's a really, really big deal. 'Cause it makes it a lot more flexible as well, right? Because it does all the good stuff that Expedition Map does, setting up your lands combos and with depths or Tron lands or getting a strip mine or whatever that might be. But the fact it's only one to crack means that like you can keep a one lander with this, whereas you can't with Expedition Map, and that's quite a big deal. Yeah, but the art thing, I guess, it is like worth noting if all your basics have the same art or not, because like technically that could be a thing if someone like wants to get a second island, and they're like, oh, actually there are some basics with different island art in the box, so I got those. But yeah, that really doesn't matter that much. Like, how often do you need to get the second of a basic that badly? Yeah, it's. I think this is really strong if you're doing any land stuff, like whether that be, get my strip mine to go for my crucible, or just get a fetch land to start fueling that, or to like the dark depth stuff, or you can even just play this for fixing. Honestly, it's not that bad. To pay 2 mana for that, and or if you like just need a way to put an artifact in the graveyard, you have like artifact sacrifice triggers. Does that as well. Really strong, really flexible card, I think.
No, awesome. No, thank you for that, James. I think so. Before we get out of here, I just we did this last time. Sorry, I forgot to tell you about this before we started recording, but let's bring this on you now.
Yeah.
Why not? What cards from this set do you think will make a splash? Like, what cards would you want to play with? What would you like to see in either the Mitgo cube or in my own cube or in any other environment that you're kind of playing in? Are there any that kind of have stood out for you? Or?
Yeah, I think the one that is like most exciting to me is the Sorin half, because it's like it's a new combo, right? It's and it's pretty different, but using cards that are going to be in a lot of cubes anyway. And Dual Cast Mage maybe not so much, but you can put a Dual Cast Mage in a cube. That's a good card anyway. And yeah, I think it's a really, really fun new angle. I think the trigger happy will do a lot of cool stuff. Same with the cosplay equipment. The card I expect to be in the most cubes is definitely the last card we talked about, the park map. But it will be an upgrade for those decks. It's not like the most exciting splashy card in the world, but it's but yeah, definitely a really strong upgrade. What about you?
No, you basically nailed my list. Yeah, park map for me is, I think that's going in probably once I get my hands on one. And yeah, Saw and Half I was already quite high on. But yeah, just talking about that in a bit more detail is really kind of let me know more the dumb things they can do. And then the other one that kind of you shed a lot of light on for me was Trigger Happy. I knew that card would be cool, but like just the fact it combos with Dark Depths makes it interesting for me. As I said, the fact that the lands deck wants to be kind of like it's primarily green and really secondary red, having your other combo piece in it be in red rather than in black, I quite like that, to be honest. So to be honest with you, like I'm not sure if it's a straight swap of Trigger Happy for Vampire Hexmage, but there will be some adjusting, I think, probably for that, and I guess we'll kind of see and we'll let the players work out what else Trigger Happy can do.
Yeah, no, that seems like a lot of fun. Yeah.
Throw a draft pod at it, and we'll see how it breaks.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it'll do something very silly, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. So yeah, that brings us to the end already. James, thank you again. It's been awesome to have you here. Thank you for all your insights, and thank you for putting me right on some of my rules in fractions.
Yeah, no worries. That was a lot of fun. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, that just leaves me to say thank you very much for watching, everyone. Please like, share, and subscribe, all that good stuff, and we will see you all soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.